interview in our presidential interview series. Today we have the pleasure of talking to Darryl Cherney, a Green Party candidate for the Green Party nomination in 2016. Thank you for being with us, Darryl.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So one of the main reasons we were doing this series, or why we started, was our listeners tend to be left and not really interested in the corporate duopoly that is our present political system. So we're trying to give a voice to as many alternative candidates as we can during this election season, both to, lend as much as we can some aid to their message, but also to inform ourselves and our listeners to the options that are out there. So if you could start out by just kind of giving a brief, introduction and history of yourself and how you got to the point that you're running for president.
Well, my politics started at age 5 when I began working doing television commercials for probably the greatest political television advertisement producer of all time, Tony Schwartz. He did the little girl picking the daisies when the atom bomb blew up in the background.
Oh, yeah.
He did Hubert Humphrey, George McGovern, right up to Bill Clinton. But he did many Congress people, and he did the first anti-cigarette smoking ads. He was a disciple of Marshall McLuhan, and this man was an influence on me starting at a very early age. He used me in his ads because I was his neighbor. He loved to use his neighbors. And so I like to think that everything's for a reason. So my introduction to politics started back in 1961. By the time 1964 rolled around, I was busy handing out leaflets for various candidates in New York City, where I was born and raised. And then by the time I was, say, 16, 17, 18, I started putting on benefit shows. My first one was for Mother Teresa at Fordham University, where I got my master's in urban education. Then went on to become an anti-nuclear activist. But I felt living in New York was just not doing it for me, even though I was born and raised Manhattan. So I jumped in my van, threw my stuff in, headed west, and wound up in Garberville, California. And that's the place where and I learned as soon as I got to Garberville that the redwoods had just been taken over. The largest stand of ancient redwoods had just been, the largest private stand of ancient redwoods had just been taken over by Charles Hurwitz and Max Sam with the help of infamous Michael Milken and Ivan Boesky. All the Wall Street crooks of the 80s were involved in what would become this mowing down of 2,000-year-old giant trees. And so I became immediately involved in defending the forest. And what was different about defending the forest than, say, working anti-nuclear in New York was that the people who were cutting down the forest, the actual loggers, were your neighbors. And the trees that were being cut down were right next door to you, as opposed to, say, anti-nuclear stuff where it's somewhere in the distance. And, yeah, you can go and see it, but this was up close and in your face, and it involved neighbors against neighbors. Of course, the whole divide and conquer thing came into play, where these corporations pit the working class loggers against the well-intentioned environmentalists. So this was a great education. I worked on that campaign for about 16, 17 years. It wound up creating the Headwaters Forest Reserve. But in the middle of that campaign in 1990, Judy Barry, who was a labor organizer as well as an amazing redwood forest organizer, and I together were car bombed. That's correct, car bombed in Oakland, California, while on a tour to organize to save the redwoods for something we called Redwood Summer 1990. And I want to say we called it Redwood Summer based on Freedom Summer, which happened in the Deep South, Mississippi, and so forth back in the early 60s as part of the civil rights movement. And so with Judy's labor organizing and Redwood Summer's connection to Freedom Summer, we were always trying to connect the dots. The labor movement, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, they all come from the same root, which is basically social justice, love, respecting all life on the planet, and living wages, as well as rights for the environment. They all come together as part of wanting to live a good, clean life on this planet. So fast forwarding, I could go on about my labor organizing with the United Steelworkers of America, as well as defeating the FBI and winning $4.4 million awarded by a jury for the violations of freedom of speech, meaning the FBI arrested us for car bombing ourselves, knowing that we were innocent, lied about it to shut us up. That's how good Judy Barry and I were doing out there. We were really organizing a storm. And so the FBI and the corporations that they work for felt we needed to be silenced. So they tried to kill us, and then they lied about it. So a jury saw through that quite easily, awarded us $4.4 million. Judy passed away, sadly, after living through the bombing. She died from cancer. But fast forward, those are my two big claims to fame. Helping to create, founding the campaign that created the Headwaters Forest Preserve, and also working with Judy Barry and our great legal team at getting justice from the FBI for violations of the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Great. So one of the things that popped up for me most when I was kind of doing some background for this interview is your documentary, Who Bombed Jody Barry? And I was wondering, before we get into the politics, if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Well, I totally omitted the fact that I'm an entertainer, and I've been in show business, as I mentioned, since I was 5. But I started writing songs and playing guitar when I was 10, and then after the car bombing, Hollywood came up to us and offered us a number of deals from different companies. And I discovered how sleazy Hollywood was, as I had earlier discovered how sleazy the record industry was as a songwriter and a singer. And so I decided, along with my director, Mary Liz Thompson, to produce this movie, the movie ourselves, Who Bombed Judy Barry? It's Judy Barry narrates the movie from her deathbed after living through the bombing. She's dying of cancer. She gives an on-camera deathbed testimony, filmed by an Oscar nominee, by the way, for the China Syndrome. The man who filmed that that deposition was, I believe, he actually won the Oscar for China Syndrome script for best script. And just a little tidbit there. So we let Judy Barry narrate her own story, and we only use archival footage. So you always get to see people talking in real time. And my feeling about this movie was that it was a blueprint for activism, an education for activism, an inspiration, hopefully, to teach people how to become effectively active, because we saved Headwaters Forest and we did beat the FBI. So you see victories happen, as well as saving the Cato Wilderness in Mendocino County, or I should say expanding it by 18,000 acres. So I have been offering this documentary for free on a DVD to any Green Party members who would like it. You can also get it on Hulu and Amazon. But the bigger point is that this has also brought me back into filmmaking, and then, which was very influenced, as I mentioned, by my days doing commercials. And now, as a presidential candidate in the Green Party, I've come back to start to produce my own advertisements, my own 60-second spots, again, influenced by my early days working with Tony Schwartz in the 60s. And so that whole film, so if I get nothing else out of this campaign, it's brought me back into making 60-second ads. And one of the things about the campaign I have to tell you is that it's not just about running for president. And in fact, I would say running for president is really one of the almost secondary points. The journey is what's important. So meeting 17-year-old presidential candidate Elijah Manley out of Broward County, Florida, making 60-second spots, being on your show, meeting all the great Green Party members, doing a little bit of organizing within the Green Party have been just as important as running for president itself.
Absolutely. And I think that's important too, as a Green Party member and looking at, our party's growth. I think that's one of the big things that having a contested a contested nomination does is, it helps us build the party. It helps us hash out ideas. So, it's, even though there is in the party a presumptive nominee, I think it's incredibly important what the opposition candidates to that nomination are doing, and the conversations they're starting. And you have some very passionate supporters out there who I've heard seen say great things on the internet. Very inspiring, and it's definitely important to a well-rounded party to do that. And real quick, only because I know we have some listeners who run community centers and things like that who will do film screenings. They can also contact you for a film screening as well, can't they?
Absolutely. They can go to whobomjudybarry.com. That's Judy Barry is JUDIBARI.com. Or they can contact me at info at the Cherney2016.com. That's CHERNEY 2016.com. Info at Cherney2016.com. I'll make it easy for you. My personal email is DC, just my initials, DC. The very aptly initialed DC at ASIS.com. Just contact me there and I'll get you a copy of the film.
Awesome. That's great. Cause yeah, I know we have specifically a few listeners who operate a anarchistic community space in Central Illinois, and they've done film screenings in the past. So I'm always excited to find them a new source to kind of invigorate their town of 5,000.
Shout out to the Refuge in Payne, Illinois.
and shout out to Chicago for shutting down the Trump rally.
Yeah, it's especially in the last year or so. There hasn't been a lot of times we've been proud to be Illinoisans. Yesterday, I mean, I'm proud to even be close to St. Louis after yesterday. I mean, they shut down rallies for prolonged periods of time too. So
that's it. That's right.
Midwest is stepping up. Show them we're in for the fight.
Represent. I'm wearing an East Coast jersey. Crap. Oh man.
So yeah, I definitely wanted to hear a little bit about that film, and it's the idea of how these kind of tangential effects happen is amazing to me. When you get into something and all of a sudden you're finding all these bonuses that you may not have thought of, like you getting back into filmmaking. It's cool how holistically activism can affect our lives sometimes, even in unexpected ways. But yeah, moving on. In the Green Party, there's a lot of agreement. It's not hard to find a green, you're not going to likely find a Green Party presidential candidate who's for more offshore oil drilling and things like that.
Really?
So, I wanted to see, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your platform, and kind of what ways you differentiate yourself as far as expanding the conversation and kind of bringing things into focus that might not be in focus right now for the party?
Well, I think one way that my platform differs from all the other candidates is that I talk about what I'm going to do when I become president. And that is a very conscious decision that I made. And so, for example, the very first sentence, when I get down to the nuts and bolts of my platform, is after my preamble. It's actually more of a manifesto than it is a platform.
Fantastic.
But, yes. But the first words of when we get into item number 1 are: the first thing I shall do as president of the United States is pardon and free American Indian Movement activist Leonard Peltier. And then I will pardon or issue clemency to Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, all the nonviolent cannabis prisoners right off the bat. That's day one. And the reason I say that is because a president can do that. We have to not just look at what our politically correct opinions are, but if we are actually going to be president, what could we do? A lone green in a sea of Republican and Democrats in Congress and the Senate. So my second act would be to put solar panels across the entire White House to solarize all the federal buildings. You can do that as president. My third item will be to deschedule cannabis to make it legal recreationally, medicinally, and industrially. Again, within the purview of the president. The fourth, we're going to put a vegetable garden up in front of the White House, and we're going to start a food bank and a seed bank, right out of the White House, and leading by example. Because you may not be able to legislate all these things because of Congress blocking you, but you can do it right there in the White House lawn and teach people. We need to have the EPA going after all the fracking sites, and we need to make water a matter of a national emergency.
Yes.
I will hold yet another commission on 9/11, because I just think that what happened on that day, as a native New Yorker whose parents were living in Manhattan at the time, I am not what you might think of as a truther, but I do believe that we've been told just you know, a giant bowl of lies. I can't tell you which ones are the truth and which ones are the lies, but I do know that it stinks to holy high heaven, and so we need to have a 9/11 commission. I need to sick my attorney general on all the civil rights violations that are going on around the country. You can do that as president. You have an attorney general who serves at your pleasure. And so when we see the police brutality, particularly against African Americans and Latino Americans, but against all Americans, actually, when we see this kind of behavior, we need to shut it down. We need to I will agitate, even though I can't do this by legislation without the Congress. We need to have mental health backgrounds for the police. We need to set up, actually, we can set up a commission. We need to have an investigation, a study. What did the police eat before they wound up shooting or beating up somebody? What was their military background? What's their psychological profile? What kind of you know, background checks did they go through? We want our airline pilots to have psychological profiles. We need to have our police vetted so that we're not operating with a bunch of sugar-pumped, PTSD, bigoted, violent people with pretty serious weaponry going around shooting people simply because they don't do what you say that you're supposed to do. We need to have an Eighth Amendment project. And this, again, is the Attorney General. The Eighth Amendment is generally used for the death penalty, but it actually says unequivocally that it is to prevent unreasonable fines and unreasonable bail. And so what we're seeing, what was uncovered in places like Ferguson, but is pretty much epidemic throughout the entire United States, is people are being fined at grotesque rates.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even something as simple as the Golden Gate Bridge. You pay your $6, but you no longer have a toll booth clerk. So they take your picture, but you're on a 2-month vacation. You come back, your ticket has gone up from $6 to $28. The mafia's loan sharking does not have those kind of interest rates. And yet the government takes your little tiny fine and balloons it. One of my neighbors owes well over $3,000 for a fix-it ticket, has had his driver's license taken away, has had his registration taken away because he didn't pay a fix-it ticket. We need to end the war on people, and we need to declare that these kind of exorbitant fines, jailing people because they can't pay fines, taking mothers and fathers away from children, are violations of the Eighth Amendment, which protects us from cruel and unusual punishment and exorbitant fines, excessive fines. By the way, I researched this. The definition of an excessive fine is one that will ruin your life. And so I would say that taking you away from your children, taking away your driver's license because you didn't pay a $20 ticket is ruining your life. Absolutely. So we need to have an Eighth Amendment project. And of course, my platform is quite long. I could go on and on. We need to end all the wars. Seems like everywhere we go, we just make it worse. Immigration, we need to welcome people to this country. These people are coming in not just because they need jobs, but because our foreign policy has made life in their own countries uninhabitable. Mm-hmm. And so we need to change our foreign policy as it relates to immigration, as well as welcoming people who we are hiring. We are hiring those folks. Palestine, Israel, hey, one nation. I really like the one nation solution. It makes sense. The South African solution, the Ireland solution, the Canadian solution, the Belgium solution. These places have all learned to live in peace, and we need the one nation solution. And when it comes, by the way, to sovereignty, not only do I want to have, you know, voting rights for DC, give Puerto Rico the opportunity to either be independent or part of the United States, but not leave them in this limbo. But I want to not just close Guantanamo Bay, I want to give Guantanamo Bay back to Cuba, for goodness sake. It's part of their island, and we have some kind of unlimited lease on it. Give Guantanamo Bay back to Cuba. It goes far beyond just shutting it down. Children's rights. Oh my God. You know, as a father, as an older father, I'm 60. I have my one and only child as my partner's one and only child as well. She's almost 4 years old. I have really, my compassion for children has gone far beyond the intellectual compassion. I can see what a difference raising a child well can do. And then I look at other kids who have one parent or no parent or abusive parents, or for that matter, are born with birth defects because of pollution that not only affects the child, but affects the parent's ability to cope in society dealing with all this stuff. We need to have a big emphasis on children's rights and the protection of children, as well as the family structure. So yes, social services, absolutely. And by the way, may I say, regarding our houseless and homeless issue, we need to have a network across the United States of free campgrounds with showers, hot showers, and campsites, and rangers who are there, possibly hired from within the population that's living there. As a bottom line, yes, we need to house the homeless, but it's such a huge problem that people who don't have houses can't even pitch a tent or go to the bathroom anywhere. And if you want to know where we're going to put these places, I can tell you we already know where to put them, because the houseless and the homeless have already set up their campsites, often in the perfect places. So we need to have, as a bottom line, a network, a national network, or mandate that having a place to live, go to the bathroom, eat, and medical care is a right, which of course gets into universal health care, which is a given. We need to have a global living wage. The problem, the shortfalling with our national living wage to $15 an hour minimum wage, it's beautiful. I support it. But it's not going to do us any good if we're paying people in India and in China $20 a month. I've talked to people in India who make $20 a month, while I was traveling there. I know this is firsthand eyewitness experience. Of course, it just happens to be true. Not to mention slave labor. We need to say that this country will not trade for products that are not made without paying their people a living wage. And that way, we can rebuild our infrastructure. We don't make TVs anymore. We don't make clothing anymore. There's nothing politically correct that you can pretty much buy. I buy at the thrift shop for the most part. Every single thing you see here, is purchased that way. But more to the point, in order to have a just society, a global society, we need to have an international agreement that everybody's paid a living wage. And honestly, the way climate change is going, which is probably my number one, specific issue, even though I'm mentioning it now, we need to end fossil fuel use yesterday. And if you say to me, well, it's not realistic to end fossil fuel use. Well, of course, we'll keep some for emergency services, but it's not realistic to think that we can continue to live while we continue to burn fossil fuels in the manner in which we do. So all the stuff by 2030, 2050, forget that stuff. We're dying now. As they say, we're dying, folks. We're dying here, and so we need to live. And that is what pro-life is really about. Pro-life for all the creatures on this planet. Pro-life for all human beings. And of course, I'm pro-abortion rights. I don't even like these dynamics. We need to change our language. Pro-life, pro-choice. They don't even make sense. I am pro a woman's right to have an abortion, and I am also pro-life because I think that we need to have life continue on this planet as we know it. I will not allow people to usurp phrases like pro-life or conservative. I am conservative. I want to conserve the environment. I want to conserve our resources. How dare they? The people who are conservative, they're very liberal with our resources. Mm-hmm. So we have a language problem here.
It's the same thing with the use of the word, radical.
Yes.
When you look at it from a more objective point of view, it's people like us who are calling for a more egalitarian distribution of power, distribution of wealth, and all of that. We're calling for moderation. And yet, what's radical is the idea that, we should have a system that hoards these things and really pushes them to an elite class. That's the radical idea. We're calling for moderation as members of the left. And it's a battle of words, like you've said.
That's right. There's a great book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. There are other works like Gynecology by Mary Daly, which really gets into the way words are used, like history versus her story, things like that. The language is a technology, and it has been very much manipulated right along with the advent of the written word itself. The last thing on my platform is Green Party building. And, the number of people say, hey, the Green Party is dying or the Green Party is tiny. The Green Party is tiny, by the way. But this is what I would say to you. I mean, we have 150 elected officials out of 515,000 elected officials. I've done the research on this. Jill Stein, the last election cycle, got 1/3 of 1% of the vote. Ralph Nader got about 2.7%. And, you know, but the point is these are minuscule numbers. But this is what I will tell you that nature, this is a law of nature. Sometimes a forest cannot regenerate, the seeds won't come to life until the forest burns. And so just because we're dormant, just because we're not flourishing at the moment, doesn't mean that a political fire won't come through our country, as I think we're seeing right now with the advent of Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. Let's not leave out the others because they're all extremists. And this is the political fire that we're talking about. So I believe that 2016 is the year of the Green Party. And so I wish whoever gets the nomination really the best of fortune, because this is the year to run.
Absolutely. I completely agree with your sentiment. And I mean, on last week's show, I actually, for matters of full disclosure, had to announce that I've been elected as an alternate delegate to the National Committee of the Green Party. You know, and it's for that same reason as right now is the time, we need to be building something. And so, it's great. It's great to see all of our our presidential candidates, in one way or another, talking about, growing the party beyond this election, and how important that is, to have a look past this 4-year cycle and kind of an understanding that democracy happens between elections, not on election day.
That's right. Saying that you are participating in the system and just vote once a year is like saying you're religious because you go to church once a week. No, your spirituality is a moment by moment thing, and your politics is a moment by moment thing. It's who you are and what you do, not what you say you are, but what you do.
Right.
Absolutely. And I really like the kind of the way that you consciously talked about the things that you will do, that you can do without even having to worry about obstructionism. Because as you kind of insinuated, let's be honest, if Obama thinks he knows obstructionism, he knows nothing compared to what a Green would face from both parties if they were elected to the White House. And and so it's really refreshing to see, hear you talk about what you can do without it, because there's many layers to lesser evilism. And even when I'm able to convince someone like, you know what, you're right, I shouldn't be throwing my vote away into the Democratic Party. I shouldn't be empowering them. Solutions will not come from them. It always kind of comes back to, well, even if I vote for the Green and they get elected, what are they going to get done? And that really does seem like it's one of the last barricades that people kind of fortified down behind to justify their position of going and voting for Hillary in November or going and voting for the institutional candidate.
I'm going to say something. I'm going to give you guys a scoop, something I've never said before. It's going to be a little politically incorrect within the confines of the Green Party. There you go. I know you're already starting to salivate.
I'm all for politically incorrect within the confines of the Green Party. So,
but I've given a lot of thought to how the heck I would get my cabinet appointed. They all have to be approved by the Senate. If the Senate's Republican or even Democrat, and I go ahead and want to appoint my lawyer in the lawsuit that we beat the FBI on, Dennis Cunningham, who also did Attica State. He did the Attica State lawsuit, won an award for representing the prisoners who were shot and killed by New York State by stormtroopers, as well as if I want to appoint him to be Attorney General. Well, I don't think that one's going through. So this is what I'm going to say that's politically incorrect. Given the enormity of the task of running the United States, I would actually ask Obama's cabinet to remain on until I'm able to replace them. I cannot be left with a non-functioning United States. And this is not to say that I approve of their work, but they also serve at my leisure. and many of them are taking direction from the president and the corporate industrial state. And so as part of a very pragmatic approach, I'm going to make sure people stick around so that there is some continuity. In fact, I'm not even going to, to save a little bit of money, I'm not even going to redecorate the White House. In fact, I'm pretty sure Obama's got and Michelle have good taste. I'm going to leave it just the way it is. And no giant inaugural balls, all that kind of thing. But more to the point, I realize these are fictional accounts, but if you've ever watched any of the TV series West Wing or House of Cards or Scandal, you can see you can get just a taste of the enormity of the situation. One minute you're dealing with North Korea, the next minute you're dealing with a mass shooting, the next minute you're dealing with gridlock in Congress, and that's all in just a couple of hours. So not to mention the Secret Service and the scandals and trying to keep yourself alive. I think I'm gonna need private security. I'll probably go to the guys who worked at Bill Graham Presents and get some of those guys. I know some of the cooler people who worked there when it was a flourishing company. So it's a really Herculean job, and it's not for everybody. And being that I have been a grassroots organizer, and I do think I see the big picture of things, and I do try to see life as president, I'm going to share that little tidbit with you, that scoop with you, because otherwise you fire them all, then what you got? All the assistants, you don't even, and then your country starts to go down. The chances are they're going to impeach you in a heartbeat. They're going to find something to impeach you with, just right off the bat.
Oh.
Because look what they're doing. They've been trying to impeach Obama. They did impeach Bill Clinton, for goodness sake, over lying about oral sex in a deposition, for goodness sake. That is not a high crime or misdemeanor. So yeah, you're going to have your hands full. I need to keep all hands on deck until I can get my own cabinet in.
Absolutely. And so kind of tangentially off of that, if you're elected and the current gridlock continues, who's your Supreme Court nominee?
Oh, goodness gracious.
We haven't asked anyone this yet. We've talked about it, but you kind of led me right into that question.
Thank you for that.
Well, I have worked with many great civil rights attorneys, from Michael Deutsch with the Center of Constitutional Rights. He would be an excellent choice. Dennis Cunningham, he's an elder. I think he's past 80, might be a little old. He might be a good attorney general, but I'm not sure about a lifetime appointment. Ben Rosenfeld, he's young, in his 40s. He would be a great Supreme Court appointment. Also worked in our case, Barry versus the FBI. Tony Serra would be wonderful on the Supreme Court. He great civil rights attorney, great defender of cannabis users. Oh, goodness. And, I'm more familiar with the West Coast than I am with the East Coast. But we're talking about the people who fall under the Bill Kunstler umbrella of civil rights activism.
Yeah, absolutely.
John Burris, another wonderful civil rights attorney from the Bay Area. And of course, we would definitely try to look. I realize many of the people, not John Burris, but the others are Caucasians. And I really think we need more women. And we need more people of color on the Supreme Court. So I would definitely be looking in that direction. It's not going to be hard to find one who has a civil rights background.
Absolutely. And so one more quick kind of localized question. So last week on our show, we talked about the new kind of cybersecurity surveillance system that's been implemented by Janet Napolitano through the University of California system. And specifically what we talked about last week was the kind of outcry from faculty and students at Berkeley in particular. So since you're in California and you've been involved in activism throughout California and have kind of felt the brunt of our security state yourself personally, I wondered if you had any comment on that controversy and that new system of surveillance under the guise of anti-cybersecurity.
Yes. Well, of course, I'm very much in favor, we should go without saying, of personal rights and privacy rights, and keep the government out of our internet and out of our telephones and out of our iPhones. I have a dumb phone, by the way. I have, but nevertheless, you can be sure that I would favor that. But in many ways, there's nothing new under the sun. If you were in the Middle Ages in Europe during the times of the witch burnings, you would have to be concerned about any one of your neighbors in your small town turning you into the Inquisition. So even though they didn't have the internet and the ability to spy on you electronically, they had all your neighbors spying on you. The same with Nazi Germany, and even the same here in the United States. They've encouraged neighbors to spy on neighbors, especially after 9/11, and in fact, overtly ask people to do so. So I want to point out that the, trying to divide and conquer us by rewarding snitches and who can just turn people. In fact, if we look at all the people in Guantanamo Bay, some of them are just ordinary folks. Maybe somebody was running a business and the guy next door had a competing business, didn't want him competing, so he turned him into the United States Army for being a terrorist, when the truth is nothing was true of the kind. And in fact, our knowledge of the language, whether it's Pashtun or any of the other languages they speak there, is abysmally just lacking on every level possible. So yes, we would. Okay, so my national security advisor, my national security director, Edward Snowden. There you go.
Well
right
done.
off the bat. I didn't even consider him for my vice president, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I want to ruin his reputation.
I want to give you a high five, but it's video. So.
You got it.
And so to wrap up, we've given most of our interviewees a we've asked them to kind of shout out to people and movements that are inspiring them. And it kind of happened organically in our first interview with Mimi Soltysik and Angela Walker of Socialist Party USA out of California, for Mimi. And it's been really fun to ask different presidential candidates, well, who's inspiring you? What movements do you see, really laying the groundwork for transformative change?
It's been really educational.
Yeah.
I might add. Like I've seen some amazing websites and groups of people because of this. So
yes.
we'll do it.
Well, in no particular order of importance, I want to give a shout out to the people who are the youth movement who is advocating to lower the voting age to 16. I was turned on to that by Elijah Manley, who's also running for president in the Green Party. I've adapted it into my own platform, but just real good out of the box thinking, real, conversation jarring, and so shout out to the youth movement agitating for lower the voting age.
Absolutely.
In fact, some of Bernie Sanders supporters, I know we're not supposed to talk about Bernie, but some of Bernie Sanders supporters just won a lawsuit in Ohio, I think just yesterday, to allow 17-year-olds to vote in the primaries if they're going to be 18 by the time of the general election. And so this movement to allow youth to vote is not a side movement. It's there, and I think we as the Green Party need to educate ourselves more on it.
Absolutely.
I want to give a shout out to Black Lives Matter, because they have become in the trenches, in the field, getting the word out movement on what's going on with police brutality, and not just police brutality, but the horrid discrimination, the bigotry, the racism that happens against people of color, particularly African Americans, but certainly Latino Americans as well. And I know some people aren't in agreement with everything they do and say, but you know what? They are effective, and they are getting it out there. And so shout out to Black Lives Matter. I want to give a shout out to the Nobel Prize winners. So many of the Nobel Prize scientists are becoming our new activists on climate change, on matters of science. And I think, who's to say that the Nobel scientists may become the next arm of a movement, or are already a movement. I'm going to give a shout out to the students at University of Missouri at Columbia who got the chancellor or the president of the university fired. But particularly, I want to give a shout out to the football team for threatening to go on strike and not playing on a majorly watched Sunday, and understanding that football players have power. And in fact, it wasn't just those college kids who helped get the university president fired, but also the NBA wearing the I Can't Breathe t-shirts. I want to give a shout out to the sports figures. A lot of it started probably even earlier than that with the two African-American Olympians raising their fists at the Mexico City Olympics. But I really want to give a shout out today to the athletes who are doing us right, to recognize that the movement isn't just the traditional, lefty hippie that we have. And so to me, expanding the movement isn't just about organizing more people. It's about recognizing that there are other people in the movement. I want to give shout outs to midwives who are risking arrest and incarceration for allowing mothers to give natural birth. And I know personally of women who have gone through midwives who have gone through the horror of being indicted for doing this kind of work, and to all the holistic practitioners who are trying to help us help our bodies and our minds as well as our politics. So how's that for starters?
That's
Pretty good. Pretty good list. I dig it.
That's off the top.
Absolutely. This has been a really great discussion.
It's been a pleasure, Darryl. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time out, getting a sitter, and talking to us today. I have to say that 2 months ago, if you would have asked me about electoral politics, you would have gotten a response of, I participate because my enemy participates. I hate it, but they're fighting there, so I've got to be there in the trenches too. And over the last few weeks, talking to just such a diverse group of presidential candidates it's been really invigorating. I don't know if in the 12 years I've been able to vote, I've been this excited about a presidential election going forward. So thank you for being a part of that for me personally, and I'm assuming Ryan as well. For
what are you speaking for me for? Come on. No, of course.
So thank you for taking the time, and thank you for putting these messages out there and putting yourself out there and inspiring people. It's really been a great experience, so much more than I think we thought. So thank you for taking the time, and the best of luck on the rest of your campaign. And I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot from you.
And let me tell you that if people want to learn more, they can go to YouTube and type in Darryl Cherney, DARRYL, Cherney, CHERNEY. I have 2 60-second advertisements plus a number of little raps I do, including my song, I'm Gonna Run for President, which I've recorded for YouTube, and which I wrote, by the way, in 2000. So this is not something that I just came up with. And you can also go to my website, feelthechurn.com. That's feel, that CHERN, but I bought a whole bunch of aliases so that you can misspell it and you're still going to be redirected. You can put .org, .com, CHURN, but it's actually CHERN, feel the churn, because after Bernie loses, it's just a short step. It's just a couple letters away from Bernie to Cherney.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
When you told me the name of your domain, I almost stood up in my home and applauded from across the country. The brilliant piece of deterrent there. So, everyone should definitely check out feelthechurn.com. And thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Such a great pleasure, you guys. Thanks for doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Darryl.
Bye.